The clink of her champagne flute against her friend's is so sharp, so crystalline. I think I can hear it from across the street. I'm sitting in a poorly lit cafe, the bitter scent of burnt coffee clinging to the air, and I'm watching my life's finale play out through a pane of glass. Or maybe it's the overture to my new one. Her name is Tiffany. She's wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, a shimmering sliver of fabric that catches the light from the restaurant chandeliers. The restaurant is called Aurelia, a place where whispers are currency and a reservation is a statement. She's making a very loud statement tonight. She laughs, throwing her head back, her blonde hair a perfect, golden cascade. She looks like a commercial for a life I was supposed to be living. The man paying for it all, my husband, Mark, thinks he's in a board meeting. He is. Just not the one he thinks. I watch as the waiter, a man with the posture of a ballet dancer and the face of a weary saint, approaches their table. He's holding a small, black leather bill folder. Tiffany doesn't even look at it. She just pulls a card from her purse. It's platinum. It has my name on it. Or rather, it has the name of the woman I used to be. She hands it to him with a casual flick of her wrist, a gesture of supreme, unearned confidence. The waiter nods, pivots, and walks away.
My heart isn't racing.
It's unnervingly calm, a flat, still lake in the dead of winter. I take a sip of my cold coffee. This is the moment. The culmination of 6 months of sleepless nights, of biting my tongue until it bled, of smiling at the man who is systematically erasing me. The waiter is gone for a long time. Long enough for Tiffany's perfect smile to twitch at the corners. Long enough for her friends to stop their giddy chatter and exchange questioning glances. I can see her tap a perfectly manicured nail against the tablecloth. The air of invincibility is starting to evaporate. Then he returns. He's not alone. The manager, a severe-looking woman in a tailored suit, is with him. They approach the table like surgeons delivering a terminal diagnosis. The manager leans down, her voice too low for me to hear, but I know the words. I rehearsed them in my head 1,000 times. I wrote the script. Tiffany's face goes through a rapid, ugly series of transformations. Confusion, annoyance, arrogance, and then pure, unadulterated panic. Her hand flies to her throat. Her friends are leaning away from her, as if her sudden misfortune is contagious. The waiter places the platinum card on the table, face up. He says something more. I can read his lips this time. It's the line I fed to the credit card company's fraud department less than 5 minutes ago. This card, he says, his voice carrying just enough for the surrounding tables to fall silent, has been reported stolen. By the owner. Tiffany looks at the card as if it's a snake. She looks at the manager, whose face is a mask of polite, professional contempt. She looks at her friends, who are now staring at her with a mixture of pity and horror. She opens her mouth, but no sound comes out. Her perfectly painted face crumbles. Her eyes roll back in her head, and she slumps sideways in her chair, a boneless heap of expensive fabric and shattered pride, collapsing onto the plush carpet of the restaurant she will never be allowed in again. I take one last sip of my coffee, leave a 20 on the table, and walk out into the cool night air. I don't look back. If you've ever felt that pit in your stomach, that feeling of being completely and utterly invisible in your own life, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're finding your way here for the first time, subscribing helps me share these stories, and it means more than you know. Our life, before it was a wreckage I had to climb out of, was a masterpiece of comfortable deception. We had the house, a sprawling modern thing with more glass than wall, perched on a hill overlooking the city. It was a house designed for cocktail parties, for showcasing success. But mostly it was just empty. The silence in that house was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. I'd wander through its cavernous rooms and feel like a ghost haunting someone else's perfect life. Mark and I were a team. That was our founding myth. We started our tech company, Innovate, in the dust and chaos of our garage. I was the architect, the one who wrote the code until my fingers were numb and my eyes burned. I designed the systems, built the financial models, secured the initial funding with business plans so detailed they left no room for doubt. I was the foundation, the steel beams hidden inside the walls. Mark was the facade. He was handsome, charismatic, a natural-born salesman who could sell ice in a blizzard. He was the one who charmed investors, who graced the covers of business magazines, who gave the rousing speeches at company-wide meetings. For 10 years, it worked. He was the sun, and I was the planet orbiting him, quietly managing the gravitational pull that kept our universe from flying apart. I handled the books, the payroll, the investments, the taxes. I was the CFO of Innovate, but more than that, I was the CFO of our life. And I was good at it. Meticulous. Obsessive, even. I knew where every dollar came from and where it went. Or so I thought. The distance between us didn't happen overnight. It was a slow erosion. 1,000 tiny paper cuts. A business trip he extended by a day. A phone call he'd taken in another room, his voice dropping to a murmur. A new password on his laptop. He'd come home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and a perfume that wasn't mine, and tell me about a brutal meeting with the board. I was on the board. We didn't have a meeting. I'd ask him about his day, and he'd give me the polished, public relations version, the same sound bites he gave to journalists. He stopped seeing me as his partner. I had become part of the infrastructure, like the plumbing or the electricity. Reliable, essential, and completely taken for granted. He'd pat my head and say, "Don't you worry about it, Aurelia. I'll handle the big picture. You just keep the engine running." The engine was me, and I was running on fumes. The loneliness was the worst part. It was a cold, heavy ache in my chest. To fill the silence, to have something that was purely my own, I started a side project. A secret. It was a small, independent software platform designed to help freelance artists manage their finances. It wasn't about money. It was about creation. It was about building something from the ground up again, just for me. I'd work on it late at night, after he'd fallen asleep, in the small office I'd carved out for myself in the guest room. It was my sanctuary.
My escape pod.
The inciting incident, the first tremor that would eventually bring the whole house down, wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a piece of paper, a receipt, fallen from his coat pocket and lying innocuously on the laundry room floor. It was from a jewelry store I'd never heard of, a small, exclusive boutique in the part of town we never went to. The charge was for a diamond necklace. The price made my breath catch in my throat. It was more than my first year's salary. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. An investment? A gift for his mother? But the date was wrong for her birthday. I looked closer. It was charged to a supplementary card on our main business account. A card I hadn't issued. A card I didn't even know existed. The name printed on the receipt for the cardholder was T. Vance. My hands were shaking. Who was T. Vance? I walked into the living room, the receipt clenched in my fist. Mark was on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, a glass of scotch on the table beside him. He looked up, his smile effortless. "Hey you. Long day." I held out the receipt. My voice was steady, betraying none of the chaos churning inside me. "What is this, Mark?" He glanced at it, his expression not changing. Not even a flicker of surprise. That was the most terrifying part. "Oh, that," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's a client gift. Tanya Vance. She just brought us a massive new account. Had to show some appreciation." Tanya Vance. I repeated the name. It felt foreign, wrong. I've never heard of her. And why is she on a supplementary card? A card I didn't authorize. He sighed, the sound heavy with practiced exasperation. "Aurelia, honestly. Do you have to micromanage everything?" The deal came together fast. It was a discretionary fun thing. I handled it. "It's good for the business. Can we just drop it?" He stood up, walked over, and kissed my forehead. It was a cold, dry kiss. The kiss of a CEO placating a concerned subordinate. "You look tired," he said softly. "You work too hard. You're getting stressed out over nothing." He was so smooth. So convincing. For a moment, I almost believed him. I almost folded the receipt, put it away, and went back to being the quiet, efficient engine of our lives. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The name T. Vance was a splinter under my skin. His explanation was too easy, too polished. And in that moment, standing in our beautiful, empty house, I knew. I didn't have proof, but I knew. He was lying. And that little piece of paper wasn't just a receipt. It was a declaration of war. I just didn't know the rules of engagement yet. The days that followed were lived in a strange, dual reality. On the surface, everything was normal. I made coffee in the morning. I went to the office. I sat in meetings and nodded along as Mark dazzled our team with his vision for the future. But beneath the surface, a secret investigation was underway. I became a ghost in my own life, a detective haunting the periphery of my marriage. My first target was the phone records. It was pathetically easy. Our family plan was under my name. I logged into the account online, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed in the password. A few clicks, and I had a complete, itemized list of every call and text he had made for the past 6 months. One number appeared with sickening frequency. Dozens of calls a day. Texts at all hours of the night. It wasn't saved under a name in his phone, of course. He wasn't that stupid. But he wasn't smart enough, either. I plugged the number into a search engine. The result came back instantly. Tiffany Vance. Not Tanya. Tiffany. Her social media profile was public. It was a curated explosion of a life lived for an audience. She was an influencer, whatever that meant. Young, beautiful, with that generic, Instagram-perfect look. Her feed was a relentless highlight reel of exotic locations, designer clothes, and 5-star restaurants. I started scrolling back, my stomach twisting into a tighter and tighter knot. There it was. A post from 3 weeks ago. A selfie, her head tilted just so, a smug little smile on her face. Around her neck, sparkling against her tanned skin, was the diamond necklace. My necklace. The one bought with our money. The caption read, "Some gifts just leave you speechless." Feeling so blessed. I felt a wave of nausea, so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. It wasn't just an affair. This was a performance. She was flaunting my life, my money, my husband for the world to see, and he was bankrolling the entire production. The phone records were the key that unlocked everything. Now I knew what I was looking for. I spent my nights poring over bank statements and credit card bills, cross-referencing dates and locations. Tiffany's Instagram post from a beachfront resort in Bali matched a series of charges from the same resort on the T. Vance card. Her photo posing with a new designer handbag matched a charge from that exact boutique a day earlier. It was a breadcrumb trail of betrayal, laid out in neat, digital columns. Dinners at places Mark told me were too stuffy, weekend trips to vineyards he claimed were boring sales conferences, a ski trip to Aspen when he was supposedly at a tech summit in Austin. He wasn't just cheating. He was living an entire parallel life, funded by the company I had bled for. I decided to confront him again. This time, I came armed with printouts. The phone records. The Instagram photos next to the credit card statements. I waited for him to come home, laying the evidence out on the polished marble of our kitchen island like a prosecutor presenting her case. He walked in, whistling, and stopped short when he saw my face. He looked at the papers, his smile faltering for just a second before it was replaced by a mask of weary indignation. "Aurelia, what is this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "This," I said, my own voice shaking with a rage I could barely contain, "is Tiffany Vance. Not Tanya. And these are not client expenses. This is you, funding another woman's life with our money." He actually laughed. A short, sharp, humorless sound. "Are you serious? You've been spying on me? Going through my things like some kind of jealous teenager?" He picked up one of Tiffany's photos, a picture of her on a yacht, and tossed it back on the counter. "She's a consultant. A social media marketing consultant. Her job is to promote a luxury lifestyle. We fund that as a business expense. It generates leads. It's marketing, for God's sake." A consultant who you call 50 times a day and text at 2 in the morning? I shot back, my voice rising. A consultant you buy diamond necklaces for? It's about image. It's branding. He was shouting now, his face red. You wouldn't understand. You're always stuck in the weeds, looking at spreadsheets. You don't see the big picture? Then came the gaslighting. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. You know, I'm worried about you, he said, his tone shifting to one of faux concern. You've been so on edge lately. So suspicious. Is everything okay? Maybe you should take some time off. The stress is clearly getting to you. He was turning it around, painting me as unstable, paranoid. He made me feel like the crazy one for connecting the dots that were so obviously there. He didn't admit to anything. He didn't deny anything. He just redefined reality, insisting that the picture I was seeing was a product of my own flawed, stressed-out mind. I stood there in my own kitchen, surrounded by the proof of his betrayal, and for a terrifying moment, I almost believed him. I started to doubt myself. Was I overreacting? Was this just some new age marketing strategy one was too old-fashioned to understand? He was so confident, so dismissive of the evidence, that he made the truth itself feel like a delusion. I left the papers on the counter and walked away. I didn't have the energy to fight him. Not then. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the sound of his steady breathing beside me, I knew this was far from over. He hadn't just lied to me. He had insulted my intelligence. And that was a mistake he would come to regret. He thought I was just the quiet bookkeeper. He had no idea that the bookkeeper sees everything. The financial bleed wasn't just a trickle, it was a hemorrhage. As I delved deeper, I realized the affair was just the surface wound. The real damage, the cancer, was in the company's finances. Mark, who had always feigned a blissful ignorance of the numbers, was now moving money with the precision of a master thief. He started by creating new subsidiary accounts, shell corporations with vague, impressive-sounding names like Innovate Global Ventures or Strategic Growth Partners. He'd transfer large sums from our main operating budget into these accounts, labeling them as capital investments or R&D funding. When I questioned him, he'd give me that condescending smile. Ilera, it's complex portfolio management. We're diversifying, protecting our assets. Let me handle the strategy. But I saw the transaction logs. The money would sit in those accounts for a few days before being funneled out again, often in smaller, less conspicuous amounts, to accounts I didn't recognize. He was siphoning funds, layer by layer, creating a deliberately confusing trail that was designed to exhaust anyone who tried to follow it. Then came the security upgrades. One Monday morning, I tried to log into our primary accounting software, and my access was denied. A pop-up message informed me that my user privileges had been changed. When I confronted Mark, he feigned surprise. Oh, right. The IT guys are rolling out a new security protocol. It's to prevent corporate espionage. Only C-level execs have full access now. It's just a formality. I was the CFO. I was a co-founder. And I was locked out. He was building walls around the kingdom we had built together, and he was leaving me on the outside. Every spreadsheet I had created, every financial projection I had modeled, was now behind a password I didn't have. He was systematically erasing my presence, my control, my entire contribution to our shared history. The betrayal was no longer just about another woman. It was about my life's work. It was about the 17-hour days I'd pulled in that garage, the personal savings I'd poured into our first server, the years of my life I had invested. He wasn't just trying to hide an affair, he was orchestrating a coup. He was stealing my company from right under my nose. And Tiffany, the consultant, was the primary beneficiary. Her Instagram was a real-time ledger of his theft. A new car, a sleek, white convertible, appeared on her feed. Hard work pays off, the caption read, dripping with an irony so thick it made me want to scream. I found the purchase record a week later, buried in the expenses for one of his shell corporations, listed as a company vehicle. He flew her to Paris for her birthday. First-class tickets. A suite at the George V. A shopping spree on the Champs-Élysées. He told me he was at a tech conference in Berlin. He even sent me a picture of the Brandenburg Gate, a stock photo he'd clearly pulled from the internet. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just lying, he was reveling in it. He was enjoying the game. I felt like I was drowning. The more I uncovered, the more powerless I felt. He controlled the company, he controlled the money, and he was controlling the narrative. He started dropping hints to our friends and colleagues that I was going through a difficult time, that I was struggling with burnout. He was poisoning the well, isolating me so that when I finally decided to scream, no one would listen. The ultimate humiliation came when he suggested we sell our house. We were having dinner, a stilted, silent affair. He put down his fork and looked at me with that practiced, concerned expression. "Honey," he began, "I've been running the numbers and I think it's time we downsize. The market is at its peak, and from a tax perspective, liquidating a major asset like this right now makes a lot of sense." I just stared at him. He wanted to sell our home, the one place I still felt had some shred of our shared history, and turn it into cash. Cash that he could then move, hide, and spend on his other life. He was trying to sever my last tie to the world we had built, leaving me with nothing but memories and a handful of cash he would probably try to steal anyway. "No," I said, the word feeling small and inadequate in the face of his monumental deceit. "We're not selling the house." He sighed, shaking his head with a look of pity. "Aurelia, you're being emotional. This is a business decision. You have to learn to separate your feelings from our financial strategy." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting for my marriage or my company anymore. I was fighting for my own sanity. He was trying to convince me that my reality was invalid, that my feelings were an inconvenience, that my entire identity was subordinate to his financial strategy. He saw me as a line item on a balance sheet he was preparing to liquidate. The quiet bookkeeper had to learn a new kind of math, the cold, hard arithmetic of survival. The lawyer's office was on the 40th floor, with a view that stretched all the way to the ocean. It was the kind of view that was supposed to make you feel powerful, on top of the world. I just felt small. My lawyer, Diana, was the opposite of the stereotypical shark. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes, a sharp mind, and an aura of unshakable calm. She listened without interruption for nearly an hour as I laid out the whole sordid story, my voice cracking as I spread the printouts of bank statements and Instagram photos across her vast mahogany desk. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the city below. Then she turned to me, her expression a mixture of sympathy and steel. "Aurelia," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm not going to lie to you. This is bad." She proceeded to walk me through the grim reality. Mark had been incredibly methodical. The shell corporations, the way he had structured the fund transfers, the slow and systematic revocation of my access, it was all designed to make it look like I had voluntarily stepped back from the company years ago. On paper, he had transformed me from a co-founder into a glorified employee and then into a non-entity. "He's created a narrative," Diana explained, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a stack of corporate filings he had submitted without my knowledge. "And in a conventional divorce, the courts will lean heavily on this paper trail. He'll argue that you cashed out your initial stake years ago, that your recent role was purely administrative. He'll claim the majority of the company's growth and assets are a result of his sole efforts." My heart sank. So, he wins? He just gets to take it all. "It will be an uphill battle," she admitted. "A very expensive, very public, very ugly battle. He'll drag your name through the mud. He'll use the narrative he's already built, that you're unstable, emotional, against you. He's counting on you not having the stomach for that fight." I felt the last of my resolve crumble. The thought of a public war, of having my pain dissected by strangers, of being painted as a hysterical, scorned wife, it was more than I could bear. I buried my face in my hands, the despair of physical weight pressing down on me. He had outmaneuvered me at every turn. He had anticipated my every move. He was going to get away with it. Diana let the silence hang in the air for a moment before she spoke again. Her next words would change everything. He's made one critical mistake, she said, her voice cutting through my haze of defeat. He's underestimated you. I looked up, confused. All this, she said, gesturing to the mountain of paperwork. It's clever. But it's also arrogant. It's the work of a man who thinks he's the smartest person in every room. He thinks of you as the quiet bookkeeper, the person who just files the receipts and balances the checkbook. He's forgotten one very important thing. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with mine. The person who builds the system knows all its weaknesses. He's playing on a board you designed, Aurelia. He's just moved the pieces around. But you know where the trapdoors are. Her words landed like a depth charge. The trapdoors. The system. For months, I had been focused on his betrayal, on the emotional wreckage. I had been playing his game, reacting to his moves. Diana's words flipped a switch in my brain. The grief, the hurt, the crushing sadness, they didn't disappear, but they were suddenly eclipsed by something else. A cold, clear, clarifying anger. He thought I was just the bookkeeper. He was right. And the bookkeeper knows that every transaction leaves a trace. Every deleted file leaves a digital ghost. Every lie is built on a foundation that must have a flaw somewhere. He had forgotten who I was. I was the one who built the servers in our garage. I was the one who wrote the original code for our accounting software. I was the one who designed the firewalls he was now using to lock me out. I wasn't the victim in this story. I was the architect. And it was time to remind him what happens when you try to demolish a building while the architect is still inside. I left Diana's office that day a different woman. The tears were gone. The despair had been replaced by a quiet, humming sense of purpose. The fight wasn't going to be in a courtroom, trading accusations. It was going to be in the shadows, in the ones and zeros, in the financial systems he thought he now controlled. I wasn't going to try and claw back what he had taken. I was going to let him think he was winning, right up until the moment I took everything. The game had changed. And he had no idea he was even playing. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I was living with the enemy, playing the part of the defeated wife. I let him believe his gaslighting had worked. I became quiet, withdrawn, pliable. When he talked about the business, I would nod meekly, pretending not to understand the complex strategies he was employing. I let him see what he wanted to see, a woman broken by stress, retreating into herself. It was a humiliating, soul-crushing performance, but it was necessary. His arrogance was my greatest weapon, and I needed him to feel completely, unassailably secure. His own arrogance, meanwhile, was growing to monstrous proportions. With me seemingly out of the picture, he became bolder. The Innovate Annual Gala, a black-tie event for our top-tier clients and investors, was approaching. It had always been our night, a celebration of what we had built together. This year, he brought Tiffany. He introduced her not as his girlfriend, but as Innovate's new brand strategy consultant. She wore a backless red dress that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. She clung to his arm, smiling a predatory smile, accepting compliments on her recent marketing successes. Mark paraded her around the ballroom, a living trophy of his victory. I had to stand there, in a dress I had bought for the occasion months ago, and watch. I had to smile politely when old friends and colleagues would come up to me, their eyes filled with a pity that felt like acid. I could hear the whispers. Poor Aurelia, she looked so tired. Mark seemed so re-energized he was framing the narrative perfectly. I was the tired, old model being traded in for the sleek, new upgrade. The worst moment came when he brought her over to me. His arm was wrapped possessively around her waist. "Aurelia, darling," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "You have to meet Tiffany. Her insights into the millennial market are absolutely revolutionary. She's been a complete game changer for us." Tiffany extended a hand, her diamond necklace, my diamond necklace, sparkling under the chandeliers. "It's such a pleasure to finally meet you," she said, her voice sweet as poison. "Mark has told me so much about the, early days." She was dismissing me, consigning me to the past, to the early days, as if I were a black and white photograph in the company's historical archives. I shook her hand. Her skin was cool and smooth. My smile felt like it was cracking my face. "It's a pleasure," I lied. "The company is lucky to have such fresh perspective." I excused myself and walked to the restroom, my legs shaking. I locked myself in a stall and leaned my forehead against the cold marble, fighting back the urge to be sick. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot coil in my gut. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was replacing me in every aspect of my life, and he was forcing me to be a spectator to my own erasure. It was a power play of breathtaking cruelty. The pressure intensified. He formally presented the plan to sell the house to our real estate agent. He started packing up my things in the office, claiming they were reorganizing the executive wing. He was liquidating our life, piece by piece, converting every shared memory into cold, hard cash that he could control. I felt myself slipping. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the sheer weight of his betrayal crushing me. The isolation was absolute. The friends I might have turned to had already been swayed by his narrative of my instability. I was completely, utterly alone, trapped in a glass house with a man who was dismantling it around me. It felt like he had already won. The walls were closing in and I was running out of air. I was at the bottom, the deepest, darkest point of the crisis, where all hope seemed like a distant, foolish memory. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself wandering through the silent, cavernous house. I ended up in the garage. It was neat and tidy now, a sterile space for our expensive cars. But I could still remember how it used to be. The oil stains on the floor, the rickety card table that served as our first desk, the tangle of wires snaking from the overloaded power outlets. I ran my hand along the wall where our first whiteboard had hung, covered in my frantic scrawls of code and financial projections. A wave of nostalgia, so sharp and painful it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. This was where it all began. This was our creation story, and he was trying to write me out of it. On a whim, I pulled down a dusty box from a high shelf in the corner. It was labeled Old Innovate Archives. It was full of obsolete hardware and manuals. But underneath it all, tucked away in an anti-static bag, was a set of old hard drives. They were the original server drives from our garage setup, the ones I had replaced and archived when we moved into our first real office. He had upgraded our entire company-wide system since then, migrating everything to a new cloud-based server he controlled. He had erased the copies, the current versions of our history. But in his arrogance, in his haste to build his new kingdom, he had forgotten about the fossils. He had forgotten about the originals. I took the drives to my small, secret office and, using an old adapter, plugged one into my personal laptop. My heart hammered against my ribs. After a moment, the drive spun to life. And there it was. Everything. The original source code for our flagship product, with my name all over the developer notes. The initial business plans, written in my voice, with my financial models attached. The early accounting ledgers, meticulously kept in a simple spreadsheet, tracking every single dollar I had personally invested. Scanned copies of the original incorporation documents, listing me as a 50% owner and co-founder. It was the unalterable, undeniable proof of my creation. It was the company's DNA, and I was holding it in my hands. He had built his empire of lies on a digital foundation, and I had just found the master key, the administrator password to his entire deception. As I sat there, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room, another memory surfaced. Years ago, when the business had first become truly profitable, I had done something just for me. Worried about putting all of our eggs in one basket, I had opened a separate bank account under my maiden name, funded with a small portion of my own salary. Linked to that account was a high-limit platinum credit card, also in my maiden name. It was my secret safety net, my in case of absolute catastrophe fund. Mark had a supplementary card for that account, one he thought was just another one of our joint business cards, useful for its high limit but ultimately unimportant. He had no idea that the primary account holder was me, Alara Vance, not Alara Miller, and that I and only I had ultimate control over it. He had used it a few times for large purchases, never bothering to look closely at the statements, which were all sent electronically to an email address only I had access to. It was just another detail he had overlooked, another part of the infrastructure he took for granted. And suddenly, the entire plan clicked into place in my mind, perfectly and terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just about the data. It wasn't just about the money. It was about using his own tools, his arrogance, his love of spectacle, and his vapid, status-obsessed mistress against him. I wasn't going to fight him in court. I was going to orchestrate a public execution of his character and his career, and he was going to hand me the weapon himself. The despair I had felt for months finally burned away, leaving behind the cold, hard certainty of a predator that has just caught the scent of its prey. The turning point wasn't a shout. It was a quiet click of a hard drive spinning to life in the dead of night. The game was on. The execution of the plan required the patience of a sniper. For 2 weeks, I did nothing but watch and wait. I monitored Tiffany's social media with the focus of a hawk, learning her habits, her insecurities, her pathetic need for validation. Her biggest rival was another influencer, a woman named Chloe, whose life seemed to be a mirror of Tiffany's, only slightly more fabulous. If Chloe posted from a 5-star hotel, Tiffany would post from a 6-star a week later. It was a petty, endless arms race of envy. This was the vulnerability I would exploit. I used a burner phone and a spoofed email address to create a fake online persona. I started a rumor, planting it on a gossip forum that I knew Chloe and Tiffany both frequented. The rumor was simple. Chloe had just secured a reservation at Aurelia, the most exclusive, impossible-to-get-into restaurant in the city, to celebrate a massive new brand deal. I even created a fake screenshot of the confirmation email and leaked it. It was bait, and Tiffany took it hook, line, and sinker. Less than 24 hours later, I saw the charge alert I was waiting for. A floral service. A very expensive one. A delivery to Tiffany Vance, with a note. I'd hacked into Mark's email. His password was pathetically predictable, the name of his first dog, and saw the order confirmation. The note read, "I know you wanted Aurelia. They're all booked. But I pulled some strings. A table for 4. Friday at 8. Go wild. You deserve it. Love, M." He had done it. He had gotten her the reservation. And to seal the deal, to ensure she could perform the part of the fabulously wealthy consultant, he gave her the platinum card. My platinum card. The one from the account in my maiden name. He probably told her it was his personal black card, a symbol of his ultimate trust and affection. The fool. The day of the dinner, I let the charges roll in. A $4,000 shopping spree at a designer boutique. A $2,000 afternoon at a luxury spa for her and her friends. I approved every single one. I wanted her to feel invincible, to be swimming in a sea of my money. The higher she flew, the harder she would fall. While she was being pampered, I was making my own moves. I sent a single, encrypted email to the 3 other board members of Innovate. The ones Mark had sidelined, but who still held significant voting power. The email was concise. It contained a link to a password-protected cloud server. The password was Garage inside. They would find a folder for each of them. In those folders was everything. The original incorporation documents proving my 50% stake, the early ledgers, the server logs showing Mark's creation of the shell corporations, and a meticulously detailed forensic accounting of every single dollar he had funneled to Tiffany, cross-referenced with her Instagram posts. The final document was a formal request for an emergency board meeting. Time, Friday at 8:15 p.m., and the subject, the immediate removal of Mark Miller as CEO on grounds of gross misconduct and embezzlement. That evening, I didn't get dressed up. I put on a simple pair of jeans and a dark sweater. I drove downtown, not to Aurelia, but to the dingy little coffee shop across the street. I found a small table by the window, ordered a black coffee I had no intention of drinking, and settled in to watch the show. They arrived at 8 on a whirlwind of perfume, laughter, and entitlement. Tiffany looked radiant, triumphant. She had won her silly little game with her imaginary rival. She was the queen of the castle. I watched them get seated at the best table in the house, right by the large front window.
Perfect.
I let them order. I watched the sommelier present a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I watched the appetizers arrive, then the main courses. It was a feast fit for royalty, a grotesque parody of success funded by fraud. As they were finishing their dessert, I checked my watch. 8:55 p.m. Across town, Mark would be 40 minutes into his emergency board meeting. He would have walked in expecting a standard quarterly review, only to find the other board members sitting there, their faces like stone, with printouts of my evidence laid out on the table in front of them. His phone would be buzzing in his pocket with frantic texts from Tiffany, but he would be too preoccupied with the sudden, violent implosion of his entire professional life to answer. It was time. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number on the back of the platinum card, the one for the 24/7 fraud prevention department. A calm voice answered. "Hello," I said, my own voice even calmer. "My name is Aurelia Vance. I need to report a card stolen. Card number 4. I read the numbers off a slip of paper. "Yes, that's it. It is currently being used, without my authorization, at a restaurant called Aurelia at 123 Main Street. The person using it is named Tiffany Vance. You need to decline the transaction immediately." The agent was efficient. "I see several recent charges today, ma'am."
Aspa, à boutique.
"Yes," I said. I let them go through to establish a pattern. But this final one, the one at the restaurant, needs to be stopped. And the authorities should probably be notified. I hung up. I looked across the street. The waiter was approaching their table with the bill. My heart was a slow, steady drum. This was it. The culmination of everything. The moment the trapdoor opened. I watched him take the card. I watched him walk away. I watched the minutes stretch into an eternity. I saw Tiffany's confidence begin to curdle into confusion, then irritation. Then I saw him return, the manager at his side. I saw the quiet, intense conversation. I saw the card placed back on the table. And I saw her face. The slow-motion collapse of her entire world, played out for an audience of strangers. As she slumped to the floor, a beautiful, empty doll whose strings had just been cut, I imagined Mark, miles away in that sterile boardroom. I imagined him looking at the proof of his theft, the evidence of my silent, meticulous work. I imagined the color draining from his face as he realized that the quiet bookkeeper, the woman he had dismissed and erased, had just balanced the books. And in his column, the final tally was 0. The true twist, the move that elevated the entire plan from simple revenge to a corporate checkmate, wasn't just about Tiffany's public humiliation. That was merely the overture. The real genius of it, if I could call it that, was in the details of the transaction itself. When Mark gave Tiffany the card, he told her, as I later learned from legal discovery, "This is for your consultant dinner." A celebration of the new brand campaign, he had to frame it as a business expense. His ego and his fraudulent accounting required it. So, when the restaurant submitted the charge, it was coded as corporate entertainment. My call to the fraud department wasn't just about a stolen card. It was about creating an official, time-stamped record of a fraudulent transaction in progress. The moment the bank declined the charge and flagged it as reported stolen by owner, it became a piece of evidence. The police were automatically notified, as is standard procedure for high-value fraud alerts. So, while Tiffany was being revived with smelling salts and hushed apologies from her horrified friends, 2 uniformed officers were already on their way. But the real target was Mark. In that boardroom, as he was sputtering denials and accusing me of being a vindictive, hysterical lunatic, the chairman's phone buzzed. It was the company's chief legal counsel. He had just been contacted by the police. They were at Aurelia, investigating a fraud complaint involving a corporate card issued to Innovate. The name of the unauthorized user was Tiffany Vance. The supposed business expense she was trying to charge was a personal dinner with friends. This was the plot twist that blindsided everyone, especially Mark. He thought I was just attacking his mistress, a petty, emotional act of a scorned wife. He had no idea that Tiffany's dinner was the final, public nail in his corporate coffin. It wasn't just about him cheating. It was about him using company resources, a card he believed was a company card, to fund his affair and then attempting to write it off as a business expense. That's not just adultery, it's felony embezzlement. The evidence I had provided the board was powerful, but it was historical. It showed past actions. The scene at Aurelia was happening in real time. It was irrefutable, public proof of his ongoing criminal behavior. It transformed him from a man having a messy divorce into a CEO actively committing fraud against the company he was supposed to be leading. His blustering stopped. The blood drained from his face. He looked around the room at the stony faces of the board members and saw no allies. He had been so focused on the battle with me, the one he thought he was winning, that he never saw the war I was waging on a completely different front. He was playing checkers, moving his king and queen around with arrogant glee. I was playing three-dimensional chess, and I had just said, checkmate. He didn't just lose the argument. He was fired on the spot, escorted from the building by security, like a common criminal. His access cards were deactivated, his company accounts frozen. While Tiffany was giving a tearful, incoherent statement to the police in the manager's office at Aurelia, Mark was standing on the curb outside the office building we had built together, unable to even get back in to collect his things.
He tried to call me.
My phone buzzed in my pocket as I walked away from the cafe. I looked at his name on the screen and declined the call. I blocked his number. The conversation was over. We had nothing left to say. The beauty of the plan was its elegance. He thought the gun was pointed at his mistress. He never realized he was the one who had pulled the trigger, and the barrel was pressed firmly against his own temple. He had handed Tiffany the weapon, loaded with my ammunition, and she had obligingly fired it right into the heart of his empire. He was so blinded by his arrogance, so sure of my passivity, that he couldn't see the trap even as he was walking into it. He believed he was the master of the big picture, the grand strategist. But a strategist who misjudges his opponent's capabilities isn't a strategist at all. He's just a fool with a title. And his reign was over. In the aftermath, there was no cinematic, triumphant explosion. There was just quiet. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, board meetings, and the methodical untangling of the web Mark had woven. His attempts to fight back were futile. The evidence was absolute. My digital ghosts and his public blunder at Aurelia formed an ironclad case. He was forced to resign publicly, citing personal reasons. The story that trickled out into the business journals was a sanitized version, but the message was clear. He was out. Tiffany vanished. Her Instagram account was deleted. Her influencer career, built on a foundation of my money and Mark's lies, evaporated overnight. I heard through the grapevine that she had to pay the restaurant bill out of her own pocket, a sum that likely wiped out her savings. She was a footnote, a casualty of a war she didn't even know she was fighting in. I felt a brief, fleeting pang of something that might have been pity, but it passed. She had made her choices. I didn't feel the elation I had expected. Vindicating, yes. Satisfying, absolutely. But mostly, I just felt tired. The anger that had fueled me for months had burned out, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. Winning the war didn't magically heal the wounds of the betrayal. The board, armed with the proof of my foundational role in the company, unanimously voted to install me as the new CEO of Innovate. My first official meeting was in the same boardroom where Mark had been dismantled. Sitting at the head of the table, in the chair he had once occupied, felt strange. It wasn't a seat of power I had ever wanted, but it was one I had earned. My first act as CEO was to initiate a full, independent audit of the company. We clawed back every cent Mark had embezzled. We dissolved the shell corporations and restructured the executive team, promoting the talented people, many of them women, whom Mark had overlooked. We rebuilt the company on a foundation of transparency and integrity, on the foundation I had designed in the first place. I sold the big glass house on the hill. Standing in its empty rooms for the last time, I felt no sadness, only relief. It was never a home, it was a stage. And the play was over. With the proceeds from the sale and my own reinstated assets, I finally had the capital to properly fund my passion project. The software platform for freelance artists became the cornerstone of the Aurelia Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing grants and financial literacy tools to women starting their own businesses. I wanted to make sure that other women would have the resources to build their own safety nets, their own in case of catastrophe funds. I wanted to give them the tools to be the architects of their own lives, so they would never have to depend on a man who might one day decide to write them out of the story. Tonight, I'm sitting in my new apartment. It's smaller, cozier, with a balcony that looks out over the glittering, chaotic heart of the city. It's a place that feels like me. The silence here isn't empty. It's peaceful. It's filled with the quiet hum of my laptop, the rustle of papers for my foundation, the potential of a life that is entirely, unequivocally my own. The scars are still there. A betrayal like that leaves its mark. It changes the landscape of your heart forever. But I've learned that scars aren't just a record of where you've been hurt. They're a testament to the fact that you survived. They are a map of your strength. Mark thought he was erasing me, but all he did was burn away the parts of my life that weren't truly mine. And from the ashes, I had the chance to build something real. Betrayal leaves a silence in its wake. A deafening, echoing void where trust used to be, but you get to choose what you fill that silence with. For a long time, it was filled with rage and grief. But now, it's filled with my own voice, my own work, my own purpose. It's the sound of me finally coming home to myself. If this story found you when you needed it, subscribing helps me bring more of these to life. Thank you for being here and for listening.